who, along with Neil Armstrong, landed on the moon and took mankind's most historic first steps. And Buzz, it is really an honor to meet you.
It's so nice to be here.
How are you?
Oh, I'm fine, thanks.
Are
nice
you?
to be back in Boston.
Yes, you have experience here.
Oh, I went to MIT for a good number of years and really learned so many things that equipped me to be in the right place at the right time later on.
Can you even describe the moment of landing on the moon? You do a very good job, I think, in the book. But for those who haven't got those pages in front of them.
Well, it was maybe the longest 11 minutes of my life. That's what it took from the time the descent engine ignited until we touched down on the surface of the moon. And you have to realize this was the first time, really, that a throttleable rocket engine with liquid propellant had been designed and tested and used to carry out this thing. Of course, there's no atmosphere on the moon, so you can't use wings, and wheels wouldn't do you too much good, so we had foot pads. We came down the descent with the engine and the landing gear first as we were moving in orbit. We were face down initially, and then about halfway through the descent we yawed around and began to see the Earth out in front of us. and then pitched over slowly. The radar started gathering some information from the ground, the lunar ground, telling us what our velocity was, and then all of a sudden we, bang, started getting computer alarms. And we hadn't seen this before. And fortunately, the people back in Houston, the computer experts, were able to rather quickly analyze the problem, and they saw that the computer was slowing down a little bit because it was getting a lot of information to process, but it was okay for us to go. And they gave us a go, and at 500 feet, Neil took over manually, and we redirected to miss some boulders that were on the ground, and stretched our landing a little bit longer. The computer already was taking us about 4 miles long. The net result was we were short on fuel.
And also, there was a big fear that the Sea of Tranquility under you might give way. I mean, no one had ever disturbed this planet, 1 billion years of age. And when I was reading about your saying that you managed to look around and catch a glimpse of Earth hanging in the infinity of space, the last couple of days I've been even trying to, I can't even imagine what that all felt like.
Well, we weren't really that concerned that we were going to sink into the dust on the moon. 3 unmanned surveyor spacecraft had landed and had taken pictures of where they'd landed, and we all felt very sure that it was going to be quite compact and hard and would support the landing.
What did it do to you emotionally?
Well, of course, I was very wrapped up in the space program. It was my second flight, and I had been a fighter pilot before. I was in the Korean War, and then I'd come here to MIT and sharpened up a new field of knowledge in the orbital mechanics, the maneuvering of objects in space. And I selected that as my thesis, and it was a very wise choice on my part because it really helped qualify me to get in the program.
But emotionally, when you stand on the moon for the first time, what does it do to you when you have to come back to Earth and depressurize in this society?
Well, I think it's not exactly the trip that causes the reaction maybe that sets in afterward. It's the way that people look at you differently. You're now a hero, and you have to figure out how exactly to live up to that.
Very tough.
Yes. I'd decided to write a book about some of the experiences that I had had.
You mean in Return to Earth, your book? Yeah, and you talked about depression and a nervous breakdown.
Well, you see, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do, but staying around the space program while other people went back to the moon didn't really strike me as the thing to do. I was a dedicated young person, young man when I went to West Point, and I was very strongly patriotic. I fought in the Korean War, and I decided that the Air Force had given me this education at MIT, and I wanted to leave NASA and go back to the Air Force. Things didn't work out really as well as perhaps they might have in retrospect. I think it was an extremely challenging position to put somebody in a position to command the test pilot school when he'd never had any experience testing airplanes or been through any formal test training. So I found myself a little bit of a fish out of water, very dedicated to the things that I'd studied, and our space program was just really going nowhere at that time.
Did our space program get so caught up in politics that after putting men on the moon, is that why we lost our edge?
Well, it's politics that causes things of that nature to come about in the first place. You just can't say that a human species is going to exist on the Earth and then all of a sudden one day say to itself, gee, I think I'll put something in orbit, and then once it's in orbit,
All right,
I'll put
so
some
we
guys up there.
We give
You
the
do that
politics
because-
credit for starting it, but then
Yeah.
can we also give the politics credit
Certainly.
for slowing it down?
Yes. Short-term politics.
The application of space, you now, that is where you are. You are looking at that, that's your field. Are we using it properly? Because you write about the fact that energy is right above us and we could grab it.
Well, energy is not quite as available, even though it's right above us in the form of solar power. It is available in the form of fossil fuel and nuclear reactors. That's a lot more readily available. There are interests that have great resources and fortunes invested in the continuation of fossil fuels, and they don't really want something new to come along, something that may take a good while. But sooner or later, either the environment or the running out of energy or problems, conflicts in the world are going to force certain nations to want to free themselves of the burden of energy. And Japan certainly is very energy poor, and they're on the verge of being able to develop solar power satellites from some place or another, and I wouldn't be surprised but what that's high on their agenda. I think the Soviets also want to do that.
This trip you made 20 years ago, what did it do to your perception of your own significance in the world? Does it change as you look back on the planet hanging in space?
Well, I think just to be able to respond to questions like that, we've had to reevaluate how we look at things. I guess in some ways I've faced some personal development challenges and have had to reevaluate where I stand in the universe and in my own life, and have done a little bit of reappraising as to what's important and is the pursuit of my selfish objectives, is that significant, or is it more important for me to feel good about how I am in terms of helping other people?
And I assume
And
you've
I've
come
had
to the
to do
conclusion
that.
the latter's the better?
Yes, I've had to do that.
Nice to meet you, Buzz, and I mean that. It's a real honor. We've all looked forward to it,
Thank
the whole
you so
crew
much,
and all
Eileen.
of us. And this book is very special. It is Men from Earth, and it's almost 20 years ago, and there'll be a day that will recall those moments on July 20th. I guess a lot of the talk shows, and there'll be something special in Washington, Smithsonian.
We're looking forward to building that spirit up again so that we can chart a course to Mars one of these days.
It's very important, and I happen to think you are a hero, and a darn good one, Buzz Aldrin. Thank you for being here.